Mira stood at the edge of the storage yard as the early sun warmed the rows of silent metal containers and the air carried the smell of dust and old iron and dry ground. She had heard about this place from an old man at the shop where she worked, and his words stayed in her mind all week. He said forgotten things still carry stories, and sometimes forgotten things wait for the right person. Mira did not know why those words stayed with her, but they did, and that was the reason she came here with her small savings wrapped inside her bag and her heart beating with quiet hope. Her life had always been simple and slow as she worked long hours at the shop and returned to her small rented room every evening where the walls were thin and the nights were quiet. She had dreams but no clear path and no guide to show her where to go. When she stood among the tall stacks of containers she felt small but also strangely alive, as if something unseen was pulling her forward. People gathered near the front where the larger containers stood as strong voices called out numbers and money passed from hand to hand. Mira kept her distance and watched as excitement grew around the biggest units filled with mystery and promise. Yet her eyes kept drifting toward the far end of the yard where the smallest container waited alone with faded paint and a bent lock and weeds growing near its base. When bidding reached it, no one paid attention as the auctioneer called the first price and lowered it again. With no response, whispers moved through the crowd as buyers waited for better chances ahead, and that was when Mira felt her hand rise without thought and her voice softly offered the price she could afford. The crowd turned for a brief second, then turned away again, and the hammer came down, and just like that the forgotten container became hers. The yard worker handed her the keys and looked at her with mild surprise and a small smile. Mira walked slowly toward the container, as if each step carried weight and meaning, and when she reached the door the metal felt cold beneath her hand, and she hesitated only a moment before turning the key. The lock opened with a sharp sound that echoed across the quiet end of the yard, and when she pulled the door open a cloud of dust rose into the sunlight and shimmered like fine gold in the air. Inside she saw wooden crates stacked neatly against one wall, and a small table standing alone near the back covered with a faded cloth, and nothing looked broken or careless, which surprised her because abandoned places often held signs of rush and loss, yet this felt careful and still. She stepped inside, and the sounds of the yard softened behind her, as if the container closed off the outside world, and left her alone with something waiting to be found. Mira lifted the cloth from the table, and discovered a small wooden box beneath it carved with simple shapes and lines that looked worn but loved, and when she touched it a quiet calm moved through her chest, as though she was touching someone else's memory without permission yet with respect. She opened the first wooden crate, and found old tools wrapped in cloth, each one placed with care and use marked into their handles and edges. She imagined strong hands guiding them through long hours of honest work, and a sense of pride living inside every motion. The second crate held bundles of notebooks tied with string, and she sat down on the cool floor to open one, and when her eyes met the first lines of writing she felt warmth rise inside her chest, as the words spoke of building and fixing and learning and teaching and helping others without asking for reward. The writing spoke of storms and hard seasons and quiet victories that came with steady effort and kind purpose. As she turned the pages she saw small drawings beside the words and notes along the edges, as if the writer had used these books not only for skill but for comfort and memory. She realized that whoever owned these things had lived with great care for both work and life, and when she reached the final crate her hands moved with slow respect, as if she already understood that this last one carried the heart of the story. Inside she found framed photographs wrapped in cloth, and she removed them one by one, placing them gently on the floor beside her. The first showed a man standing in front of a small workshop with strong arms and tired eyes and a calm smile, and beside him stood a woman with gentle posture and warm expression, as if her presence itself brought peace. Later photos showed children growing taller year after year, standing in the same place with tools in their hands and laughter in their faces. On the back of one frame, a name was written in careful ink, and that name was Sam. Mira held the frame close as a strange emotion filled her chest because it felt as though this family had been waiting for someone to see them again. She did not yet know why this container had been sealed and forgotten, or why these memories were left behind, yet something told her that loss and hope were hidden together inside these walls. As the sun lowered outside, and the shadows stretched long across the yard, Mira closed the container doors and locked them with steady hands, yet she did not feel that she was closing something away but opening a path forward for herself, and for the unseen family of the past. She walked away knowing that her quiet life had just changed, and that the true story of this hidden legacy had only begun. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains of Mira's room as she sat on her small bed, holding the wooden notebook from the container, and her mind was still inside that quiet storage yard, and those silent photographs, and the name Sam that now lived in her thoughts like an echo that would not leave. She had brought one notebook and one photo home with her, after gently locking the container again because her heart told her that this was only the first step and not the end. She opened the notebook again and slowly read through the pages with careful eyes and steady breath, as the writer spoke of days working inside a small workshop by the river fixing tools and machines for farmers and travelers and teaching children how to shape wood and mend broken things and carry pride in honest labor. The words spoke of a promise made to protect the place, even if time changed everything, and Mira felt that promise settle quietly inside her chest, as if it was calling out to someone who still lived. She packed the notebook and photo into her bag, and left her room early that day, choosing not to go to the shop, but instead walking toward the oldest part of town where the river bent gently through fields and trees and memories lived in the stones and paths. The walk was long and quiet, as morning birds lifted from the grass and distant sounds of work drifted through the air. People passed Mira without notice, but she carried the past with her in her bag, and in her heart, and when she reached the river she followed its curve slowly, watching the water move with steady purpose, just like the words in the notebook. After some time she saw it standing quietly behind tall grass and leaning trees, the small workshop from the photographs still standing though, worn by years and rain and sun, yet still holding its shape as if it refused to fade completely away. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, and dust rose into the soft light as her eyes adjusted to shelves lined with old tools and work tables marked with the touch of many hands. She felt a strange sense of return, even though she had never been there before, and as she stepped inside her breath slowed and her thoughts went still as if the walls themselves were listening. She placed the photograph on the center table and whispered the name Sam without sound, and in that quiet moment she felt the past gently stir. Outside the workshop an older man stood watching her from a distance, and after a moment he stepped forward slowly, leaning on a wooden cane, and his eyes held both surprise and recognition as he looked at Mira, and then at the photo on the table, and his voice was soft when he spoke, and he said that name had not been spoken here in many years. Mira turned to him with steady eyes and asked if he knew Sam, and the man nodded slowly, and said Sam had been more than a builder, he had been the heart of this place, and the man introduced himself as Ben, and said he had once been a boy who learned here under Sam's steady care. Ben told her that Sam had built more than wood and tools, as he had built people, and taught them patience and skill and quiet strength. And he told her that one day Sam had closed the workshop without warning, and left the town without farewell, leaving behind questions that no one could answer, and years later when storms damaged the building it had been sealed and forgotten. As time moved on and memories faded, Mira showed Ben the notebooks and the photo, and his hands trembled as he touched them, as if years had folded back into his palms, and his eyes filled with gentle sorrow as he said that Sam had promised to protect his family legacy and keep their work alive, but something had forced him into silence. Ben told Mira that Sam had once spoken of danger not from people, but from time and loss, and that he had hidden parts of his life to protect the rest, and Mira listened with deep attention as Ben carefully shared the last days. He remembered seeing Sam walking alone beside the river carrying a wooden box much like the one found in the container, and that night the workshop lights had gone dark and never returned. The town had searched, but Sam had vanished without trace, and though years passed the workshop remained sealed as a quiet symbol of unanswered story. Mira felt the weight of the legacy pressing into her chest, and she realized now that the container had not been a forgotten place but a shield built with care to guard the heart of a family that had once served many. She followed Ben outside, and they walked together along the river path where memories lived in stones and water, and Ben spoke of the children who had grown in that workshop and scattered across distant places carrying skills they learned from Sam even when they did not know where their teacher had gone. As the sun climbed higher, Mira returned to the container that afternoon with Ben at her side, and together they opened it again as if stepping into a sealed chapter of time. She showed Ben every tool and notebook and photograph, and the small wooden box that rested beneath the faded cloth. When she opened it slowly both fell silent as inside they found letters tied with ribbon, and a thin book wrapped in soft cloth, and the first letter bore the same careful writing as the notebooks, and the words inside spoke of fear and hope and love, and the need to protect something greater than fear. Sam had written that change was coming, and that some stories must sleep until the right hands woke them again, and that his family legacy was not only made of wood and tools but of teaching kindness and building trust and passing skills forward without asking for reward. Mira felt tears rise in her eyes, not from loss but from the quiet beauty of such purpose, and she understood that the container had been built not to hide memory away but to hold it safely until someone who could listen arrived. Ben looked at Mira with gentle respect, and said that perhaps she was the one Sam had waited for though he never knew her name, and that sometimes the future answered questions the past could not finish asking. Mira felt the truth of those words settle inside her like steady ground, and she promised aloud that she would not let the legacy sleep again, and that the workshop would not remain silent anymore. Ben smiled softly, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders after many years, and the light inside the container seemed to grow warmer, as if the past itself was listening and approving. As the day closed and the sky softened into evening colors, Mira stood before the workshop once more holding the letter, and feeling the responsibility now resting in her hands not as burden but as gift. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, as rebuilding always takes patience and courage, but she also knew she was no longer just a shop worker with quiet dreams, as she had become the keeper of a story that deserved breath and hands and life again. Mira stood outside the small workshop as the morning breeze moved through the tall grass and the river flowed beside her with calm strength, and she felt as if the past and the present were standing together in that quiet space waiting for her next step. The letters and the thin book rested safely inside her bag, and their weight felt both gentle and powerful, as if they carried more than paper and words, and Ben stood beside her leaning on his cane, and watching her with a calm smile that held faith and relief. Mira took a deep breath and pushed open the workshop door once more, and this time she did not enter as a visitor, but as someone who had chosen to return life to a place that had slept too long. Inside the air was still and filled with dust and sunlight, and she could almost feel the steady hands of Sam guiding her movements as she placed the tools on the work table one by one with care and respect. Ben helped clear the floor and brush off old wood, and together they moved slowly, yet with steady purpose, as if each motion honored the years that had passed in silence. Word spread through the small town faster than Mira expected, and by the next morning 2 young boys arrived at the workshop door curious and quiet, and one carried a broken wooden cartwheel while the other held a small tool that no longer worked, and their eyes were full of hope and doubt mixed together. Mira welcomed them inside with a gentle voice and showed them where to sit, and she studied the wheel and the tool just as she had seen in the notebooks, and she worked slowly, explaining each step as her hands followed what her heart had already learned from Sam's words, and by the time the sun reached its highest point the wheel turned again, and the tool rested ready for use, and the boys left with bright smiles and quick steps as they ran back toward town with news that the workshop had awakened. Mira watched them go with warmth in her chest as she realized the legacy had already begun to move once more. Days turned into weeks, and the steady sound of work returned to the small workshop beside the river, and people came from near and far carrying broken chairs and worn tools and quiet stories of their own, and Mira listened to each one with patience and care as she repaired not only wood and metal, but also small pieces of hope that people had lost along the way. Ben visited often and shared stories of Sam with the children who gathered after school, and taught them how to hold tools with respect and how to move with patience instead of rush. The workshop filled with voices and movement and learning and laughter, and each day Mira felt stronger and more certain that this path had been waiting for her even when she did not know it yet. One evening as the light softened and the workshop grew quiet, Mira opened the thin book from the wooden box and began to read its final pages for the first time, and there she found truths that had been sealed away with both love and pain. Sam had written of a season when the river flooded beyond its usual banks and threatened homes and fields, and when fear spread through the town like shadow, and he had used the workshop as a shelter and a place of repair for many families, and he had worked day and night without rest, guiding others with steady courage and kindness. But in the midst of that chaos something had gone wrong, as stolen supplies and broken trust entered the town, and blame fell in many directions, and Sam chose silence over anger and disappearance over conflict to protect those he loved, and to keep the workshop from becoming a place of division. He had hidden the tools and stories and letters not to escape from his legacy, but to protect it from being torn apart by fear and misunderstanding. Mira closed the book with moist eyes and steady breath, as she felt the full weight of Sam's choice settle inside her heart, and she understood now that the hidden legacy was not only about work and teaching but also about quiet sacrifice and the courage to step away so others could live without harm. She shared the truth with Ben that night as they sat outside beneath the stars and listened to the river speak its endless song, and Ben bowed his head in long silence before lifting his eyes with deep respect and acceptance as he said that Sam had carried burdens none of them had seen, and that now the truth had finally found its way back into the light. Mira placed the thin book back into her bag, knowing that the final part of Sam's story had given her new strength and guidance for what lay ahead. Months passed, and the workshop grew into a gathering place once more where voices of young and old mixed with the sound of work and learning, and Ben watched with quiet pride as children who once wandered without direction now found purpose in shaping and repairing and helping one another. Mira guided them with steady hands and simple lessons, teaching patience and care and strength without harsh words, and the river flowed beside them as it always had, carrying the memory of what was lost and what had returned. And one late afternoon, as the sun softened into warm colors, a stranger arrived at the workshop door with slow steps and tired eyes and strong hands that carried marks of long travel and quiet hardship, and when Mira looked into his face, she felt a strange pull of recognition that she could not yet name. The stranger introduced himself as Leo and said he had learned of the workshop rebirth from distant roads, and that he once knew the man named Sam, though many years had passed since their last meeting, and Mira felt her heart tighten as she invited him inside, and listened as Leo spoke of traveling far and wide, carrying Sam teachings into places beyond the river, and the fields and the town, and how he had returned now because he felt the past stirring again like a voice calling him home. Ben listened with quiet wonder as Leo shared pieces of Sam's journey that no one in the town had ever known, and spoke of courage shown in distant places, and lives changed through simple acts taught long ago in the small workshop by the river. Mira felt the final pieces of the hidden legacy gently clicking together inside her heart as she realized that Sam had never truly vanished, as his work had traveled far beyond the place he once stood, and now those paths were quietly leading back to her. As night settled and the workshop lights shone warm through the windows, Mira stood between Ben and Leo, feeling the past and future meet in the same quiet space, and she knew that Sam's legacy had grown beyond wood and tools and words, and had become something that lived inside people, and would continue to grow long after her own steps faded. And yet she also knew that one final chapter still waited to be revealed as the legacy moved into its brightest season of renewal and truth. The workshop beside the river no longer felt like a place that had once slept in silence, as now it breathed with voices and movement, and shared purpose, and on that soft morning Mira stood in the doorway watching children shape wood with careful hands while older people worked beside them, offering quiet guidance and warm smiles, and the sound of tools moved in a gentle rhythm that felt like a living heart. Ben sat nearby telling stories to a small group who listened with wide eyes and steady attention, and Leo worked at the far table repairing a broken cartwheel with calm strength and focused care. Mira felt the hidden legacy moving through every motion and every shared breath, and she knew that this place had become what Sam had always dreamed it could be. Later that day, the town gathered near the river as word had spread that Mira wished to share something with them, and people came with quiet curiosity, carrying both hope and questions in their faces, and when the crowd settled, Mira stepped forward holding the thin book and the letters from the wooden box, and her voice was calm yet filled with purpose as she spoke of Sam's journey and his choice to protect the workshop and the people by stepping into silence. When fear and confusion rose long ago, she spoke of the flood and the shelter the workshop had given, and the quiet sacrifice that saved many from greater loss, and she shared the truth that Sam had never abandoned his legacy, but had allowed it to grow beyond one place and one name. The town listened in deep stillness as the weight of forgotten years lifted and old misunderstandings softened into quiet understanding, and when Mira finished, Ben stepped forward with steady steps and spoke of the boy he had been and the man he had learned from, and Leo followed with words of distant roads and lives shaped by lessons born beside this very river. And in that shared moment the past found peace with the present. As the crowd slowly dispersed, many came to Mira with gentle thanks and quiet apologies and new offers of help, and as the sun moved lower the workshop doors remained open as people returned with broken tools and hopeful hearts, and the sound of work continued into the evening as if the river itself had chosen not to be alone that night. Mira worked beside Leo and Ben and the children with calm joy as she realized she no longer stood at the center alone, but as part of a living circle that carried strength in many hands and many voices. In the days that followed, the workshop grew into more than a place of repair, as it became a place of learning and sharing and quiet gathering, and those who once passed the river without thought now stopped to rest and listen and lend their hands, and Mira guided the growth with patience as she balanced the lessons of the past with the needs of the present and the dreams of the future. She carved new signs for the workshop, not with one name upon them, but with words of purpose that spoke of building and helping together, and those words became a quiet promise to all who entered. One evening, as warm light fell across the river, Mira sat alone for a moment holding the wooden box in her hands, and she opened it once more, and touched the letters with calm respect and steady gratitude, and she whispered a quiet thank you to the unseen hands that had shaped this path long before she was born, and though no answer came in sound, she felt warmth settle gently in her chest like a soft and steady reply. Time moved forward with gentle strength, and seasons turned, and the workshop stood through wind and rain and sun as it always had, now filled with life and purpose once more, and children who once learned simple lessons grew into teachers of their own, and travelers who passed through carried stories of the workshop into distant places, and sometimes letters returned from far paths with words of thanks and shared memory, and Mira kept each one inside the wooden box, adding to the hidden legacy that was no longer hidden but shared freely with the world. Years later, when Mira's hair had begun to show threads of silver, and her hands carried marks of steady work, she stood once more at the edge of the river, as the sun rose just as it had on the day she first entered the storage yard, and she looked back at the workshop filled with voices and light and movement, and she felt deep peace settle inside her as she understood that the forgotten container had not only held a family legacy but had opened the door to her own true path. Ben sat nearby watching the children work with quiet pride, and Leo guided new hands with patient care, and the river moved on as it always had, carrying both memory and promise in its endless flow. And so the hidden legacy lived on, not as a story locked away in wood and paper, but as living purpose shaped each day by those who chose to build and teach and help without fear, and without need for reward, and in that quiet strength Sam's dream found its fullest breath, and Mira's journey found its true home.